Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Asian Hustle Network podcast. Today we have a very talented CEO with us. His name is Tony Tai. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Of course, Tony, tell us about yourself. Where'd you grow up and how did you develop this entrepreneurship journey?
Yeah, so I grew up mostly in Southern California. I grew up in a little city called Garden Grove, home of really good Vietnamese food, and actually at the time Korean barbecue. And I think our claim to fame was we have Steve Martin was our alma mater from Garden Grove High School. So it's a pretty small city, but pretty fun growing up. But yeah, grew up in SoCal, had your typical kind of Asian childhood. But I think what I've talked about this a little bit before, and what people kind of don't believe me when I say it, but I was not a very good student. When I was a kid, I was pretty lazy when it came to schoolwork. So that's kind of an oddity, and I kind of lucked my way into getting into schools and going to law school. So it's a little bit odd, but yeah, I don't know, man. What else can I talk about when it comes to my childhood?
Yeah, I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. I mean, obviously it does take a little studying, a little hard work to get to the schools you got to and to be the position that you got in, right? And I just want to highlight that every single Garden Grove person I met has a lot of swagger for some odd reason.
Oh
I don't know.
no, I forgot. I didn't mention that.
I don't know what they do in a small city, but everyone seems overly confident, and which I
love. Well, now you've met the first guy who's not. Well, maybe I am overly confident. Actually, not.
No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I mean, it's great hearing about your childhood, and like, I actually saw a post on Instagram today, and that post is like, this kid was like, I think I saw a post about this kid. He was like, yeah, I didn't really care about high school, whatever, but now I run like a multi-million-dollar business, right? I don't know why your story and that story sort of correlate with each other. I'm like, wow, it's a lot of commonality. So I want to ask you, like, what made you want to become an entrepreneur? Was it something that you always thought about a lot growing up? Was it something that your teachers told you, or you woke up one day, you saw a movie, and you're like, I want to become an entrepreneur?
I mean, entrepreneur is like a really large, like classification. I think, if we were to break it down, like working at a law firm, being a lawyer, you're an entrepreneur naturally. Like that, you're selling yourself. That's it, right? You're selling yourself. You're selling your legal services. It doesn't really matter what law firm you're at. Like if you're not a good lawyer and not a good service provider, you're not going to get a ton of work, whether it's internal or external. So for me, entrepreneurship is just the understanding of the underlying business that you're kind of performing, and then figuring out how to connect with the end client or customer. And so for me, it was always like, I never thought about it like entrepreneurship. I always thought like, what's the most efficient way of solving the problem, right? And if the problem exists, at the customer level, then I'll build something to help solve the pain points at the customer level. But if it's if it was internal for a large corporation, then I'd be willing to do that as well. It just so happens from the stuff that I'm passionate about, going direct to the end user is the more likely and more efficient route. And so that's kind of what opened up our entrepreneurship to me, is it's kind of an efficiency play. And I think the other part of it is like, people think that like entrepreneurship entails like a ton of risk, and it does. Don't get me wrong, right? Like if you run your own business, you're selling yourself, there's always the risk that somebody won't buy. And so people always have that fear. That's that kind of fear of rejection and not being good enough. But again, like I'm a little bit odd, and I don't think of it that way. I think of it as like just calculated risk, like everything you do. You take a job with a business, there's a risk that they go under, or they lay you off, or they fire you, all that stuff. That's all calculated. And so when you start your own business and you become that entrepreneur, like there's inherent risk in that as well, but you're just making those calculations to figure out, is it worth it to me? And, does it make sense? And for us, at my company, like it made sense for everybody involved.
I like that. I mean, I like that story a lot. I mean, you're right. I mean, entrepreneurship, yes, it is a risky field. It's a lot of uncertainty every day. You don't wake up bored, right? That's a fact. There's probably more bad days than good days, to be honest. But as you said, right, depending on the business that you're in, it can always be very calculated. You always kind of like plan your risk and be more risk averse moving forward. So my question for you, it's like I know, I mean, looking at your bio, looking at your LinkedIn and everything, I know that you're experienced in software engineer, right? And when I look at you, that's like an I don't know, that alternate universe that I could have been in. I used to work as a software engineer for about 10 years. I actually studied for my LSAT stuff, trying to get to law school as well. It's funny because I didn't finish law school, and my corporate lawyer right now is someone I took LSAT classes with. It's just ironic as hell, right?
Awesome.
So I want to ask you, like, walk me through your, let's say after college, right? Walk me through your thought process and journey. Like, what was your first job like? What was your second job like? What was your biggest takeaway from these jobs? Because what I learned about talking to entrepreneurs on this podcast is that no matter what stage you're in, you always draw upon every single experience you ever had in your life to help you make decisions as an entrepreneur. I want to hear about that part too.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a great perspective to take yeah, to take away from that. Um, so I mean, not to bring it back to my childhood, but it does frame it up a little bit. So I gotta be clear on this, right? Like, not successful at high school, not successful at middle school. I refuse to do homework, whatever. If I could do it over again, would I do it that way? No, I wouldn't. I would have just played the game, followed the rules, nab the high score so I could get into college a lot easier. But part of that was, my dad lost his job. I think just as I was, no, just the year before I was graduating high school. And so I had to take a quote unquote gap year to make ends meet. So it wasn't a choice, if I'm being honest with you, right? Like, I had to make ends meet for the family. And so I went off and tried to get a job. I tried to get a job everywhere, man. I applied to Taco Bell. I applied to Home Depot. I got laughed at Home Depot because I'm pretty small. I was a small,
And
scrawny
what year
kid.
was this, by the way? So we have a reference.
07, 08, right?
Okay.
Yeah, just around that recession, the first recession. Some of them hired, but they weren't hiring me, right? And I had a good friend say, like, hey, my dad needs a website made, like, can you do that? And I said, sure. Like, I tinker with software. So I built that website, and he was so happy with it that he referred more business to me from other folks. And that kind of just spiraled. And then I started doing a lot more tech development and software development. And the turning point for me going from entrepreneur, building this business, paying for, a mortgage, to deciding I should go to school, was I got yelled at by a client because, my client, one of my clients, is really happy with me, and he said, hey, where'd you graduate from? And I said, oh, I haven't gotten to school. And he told me I was stupid. And he's like, this whole wonderkin thing you got going on, like, that's not going to last forever. You need to apply to school, you need to get in, and you need to go, right? It's for peer signaling. And so I did that, and to pay for both school, family stuff, I worked full-time while I was in undergrad. And my primary focus, because it was easier and the jobs were longer, were enterprise software development. Basically stuff that other engineers found really, really boring, I would just do because it paid the most. So that was kind of my first introduction to big business and building systems for them. You were in it for, sounds like 10 years. I did this process called ETL, which I'm sure you're familiar with, right? Extract, transform, load processes. And I mean, we want to talk about boring stuff. Like, man, that is the most boring of boring stuff that you could possibly work on, but it paid the bills. And I got a lot of experience, not only working in software engineering, but also interfacing with clients. And when I was doing these deals, I would have to hire lawyers because I didn't know what a contract looked like. Such foreign concepts to me. So I hired these lawyers to draft and negotiate deals for me. And I just got so frustrated having to deal with them. And so, that's one of the kind of factors that, led me to think, hey, you know what, maybe I just go to law school and do this better and not have to pay these, I'll censor myself, these folks so much money when they clearly don't understand what the heck I'm doing. And so that was one aspect of it. And the other, many other aspects. But since I was such a failure my entire life, like doing one thing nice for my mom and aunt who raised me basically, I'd be lying to you if I didn't say like that was a major motivator. You know what? I've given you so much grief. I will go get the JD. It'll make your life, you can brag to your friends about it, whatever it is, but and I'll use it for my own business. So that's what led me to law school. I just wasn't as smart as you and didn't pull the ripcord. So I just went through it.
I wouldn't say that. I think the common theme in this podcast so far is how humble you are. I feel like you're not giving yourself enough credit, right? So you got to USC law school, man. It's hard to get into that school. So congrats on that.
Thank you for that. No, I just met with USC today. It's just kind of funny. I was meeting with Chloe Reed there, who meets with a lot of alumni, and she asked me why I started the business, and I told her out of obligation, and she's like, "What obligation?" I'm like, "I feel like I'm such a lucky guy." Like so lucky. I mean, I get to talk to you. I ran into Ashley when I was working at Goodwin. I ran into like most of my team working at Goodwin and stuff like that. I just want to be able to give back to the community, and like building the business was a part of me giving back to the community. But yeah, man, I mean, like I don't, the one factor that I'm like I always tell people is like, I'll never claim to be the smartest guy in the room. That'll never be me. I like being in a room with people smarter than me. But I will always be the most hardworking person in the room. And 9 times out of 10, that works really well, right? Whatever it is you do, right? Like if studying for the LSAT, for example, right? Like there's some people I met and would study with, and they would get like 178s, 179s, near perfect every time, just off the bat. I wasn't that lucky. I had to study. And so, you study and then you get there. And so I'm probably a good example of like what happens when you don't study. This is what happens when you do put in the work and try to get the points.
Yeah. I mean, that's also very inspirational to hear too. Right. I mean, I personally feel like this is my point of view too. I never felt like there's no such thing as a dumb person. You're just not putting enough effort into it, or you haven't found your zone of genius yet. Like what motivates you, what doesn't feel like work to you, right? Everybody has that zone, but you just have to find it. And some people find it at different stages, whether that be, like you said, obligation, like trying not to disappoint their parents. It's such an Asian thing to hear, right? But I mean, I want to dive deep into like HyperDraft, like talk about HyperDraft. What is it? Why did you create HyperDraft? I know you mentioned earlier that, you learn most of your business skills working as an engineer, and then going to law school because you're like, hey, guess what? I could do it better myself, right? But then HyperDraft is unique because I feel like it combines everything that you are, right? An engineer, a lawyer. I just want to hear more about it. Like, what's the origin story behind HyperDraft?
Yeah, no, I love that, man. I appreciate it too, because it is how it feels, right? Like when we start, it takes a little bit of distance to be like, yeah, it's kind of random, right? Like it's kind of random that like this guy who's an engineer on enterprise side decides to go to law school, and then does the law school thing, and then works in it, and then builds this out. I wish I could say it was like more planned, but some of it's happenstance. After my 1L year, usually you're supposed to apply for what's called like a judicial externship. You got to work for free for a judge. It's probably it should be framed up differently, but that's in my head, that's what it was. And I'm like, that's not going to work. I gotta pay bills. And so I didn't apply to any of that stuff. I applied for law firm jobs, and I got a job with a law firm, and the law firm needed me to do corporate M&A. And, I'm sure you've got lawyer friends that will tell you a 1L in law school knows nothing about corporate law, like nothing, zilch, nada. And so it was a steep learning curve. But when I jumped in, to your point before, and I love talking about pattern recognition and pattern learning, pattern-based learning, because it's so powerful. All the contracts I realized at the end of the day, it was actually just software. It's just code, slightly more ambiguous, but it's just code. And so I really enjoyed reading through and drafting code. That's that weird like obsessive compulsive aspect of me is like, I loved every part of it. I loved every word, every character, everything, because it reminded me so much of code. But the problem I discovered was, man, as an engineer, we're so spoiled. We build these tools that like really help streamline stuff, linters, debuggers, stuff like that. But lawyers don't have any of that. We have Microsoft Word, right? And that's buggy. And you still won't find most lawyers touching Google Docs, right? God forbid that people do use a web app. And so when I went back to USC for my second year, I met up with a professor, Michael Chaslow, and he taught USC Small Business Clinic, which I was in. And I would talk to him about this. I'm like, dude, you don't realize how bad this is. And he's like, really? Like, show me. And I'd show him. And he's like, oh, I'm sure somebody's built this, right? Because we're lawyers at this point, and so we're very pessimistic about our ability to build a business around it. So we're very resistant to doing that. So we looked around, couldn't find anything. And so I advised for a few companies trying to get them to do it. They just never were able to get it there. I got to the point where I was in practice and I was like, you know what? I'm going to make this money and then I'm going to outsource it. I'll hire engineers to go do it. And I tried that for a year and blew a few $100,000 on it, and then realized that there's this huge communication gap between engineering concepts and legal concepts. And just getting them to talk to each other, it takes so much time, and time in the legal field is money. So like the more time I spend talking about it and not doing it myself is time I'm just wasting. And so ultimately it got to a point where I'm like, I'm practicing from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. and I'm coding from 10 p.m. to 3 or 4 a.m. It's not sustainable. Like we have to make a decision, which is, around the time I decided like, we're getting traction here. Software is being built and it looks good. We already have a few clients in the hopper. My current clients on the law firm side of things want to use the software. So let's kick off and do this. So that's kind of I know that's rambly. I'm sorry for that, but
You're not rambling. It's fine.
Yeah, hopefully I gave you kind of like a timeline. Like, so this started early. The kind of ruminations around the idea started in law school. And then I was such a pessimist. That's the theme, right? Like I'm such a pessimist and I didn't believe in myself until I got to the point where and by the way, I didn't give enough credit to one of my mentors, Chris Nguyen. He's like a brother to me. And he was one of my clients and he helped coach me into being a CEO and like got my ass into gear. So I don't know if I can cuss here, but you'll bleep it out. So
it's fine. It's fine. I mean, you're just communicating raw emotions. And lots of things to love about that, right? I think the fact that you thought about it, you saw a gap in the market, and most importantly, you took action, right? Honestly, I think all of us can go through our day and be like, I wish I had this app. I wish that was done better. I wish this and that. Those are all business ideas, right? And the fact that you saw it and you found your unique ability to solve that problem and you took action on it and found traction. Not a lot of founders can even say that found product market fit right off the bat, right? You found this miracle thing that people always talk about in tech, product market fit, find your customers, whatever it is. You find your customers first and you win for it. So hats off to you, man. And again, right, I feel very similar to you because I am myself a little bit of a pessimistic person, right? I'm always like, am I the right person for this?
yeah,
I think I used to think that that's just me, right? But the more founders I talk to on the Asian Hustle Network podcast, which I would talk to like over like 150 founders, that everybody has those thoughts, the doubt, the why me, the oh no, like maybe I'm not good enough mentality, right? I think that's a very common theme, imposter syndrome. And you found your traction, you were able to take it to next level, you found the right mentors. Those are all secret ingredients to success. And the fact that you think that you're not the smartest person in the room is also a superpower, right? When you're not the smartest person in the room, guess what? You take a step back and you listen to people around you. And you're able to incorporate more ideas into your product, which I feel like, it takes a great amount of EQ, emotional intelligence, to do something like that, admitting that you're not smart, and then finding a way to bring a team together through a culture, through collaboration, through exchange of great ideas. So the next question I have for you is, after you found traction, did you go out there and raise venture capital money? How did you keep yourself moving? And when you first raise your, let's say for example, you first raise your first round of funding, what was going through your mind? I know a lot of founders get excited, a lot of founders get scared, but what was going through your mind?
That's such a good question, man. And I'm going to answer your question for sure, but you're going to spark something. You can cut this out, but you talked about having that imposter syndrome. Am I the right guy to do it? What do you do to overcome that? And so before you answer that part, like, what do you think the reason is for having that feeling? Because it seems to be a theme, right, with entrepreneurs and especially in the Asian side. So what do you think is kind of the cause, and what helped you get over it?
Yeah, for me, I feel like everybody goes through that. It's just a human emotion, right? Whenever you put yourself out there, you always think to yourself, am I the right person for this? Your insecurity shows. Everybody is very insecure in different ways. And everybody has doubts in themselves, in their self in different ways. But then the people who are able to acknowledge those feelings and not sweep it under the rug and admit that this might be a part of their strengths and weaknesses, I think imposter syndrome actually helps us reflect more. And when we reflect upon ourselves, upon our everyday work, we're able to reevaluate everything and look at things from a different angle. So I don't necessarily see it as a weak thing. I just think it's very part of human nature to just have those doubts and have those feelings and be able to acknowledge them and don't see them as a sense of weakness.
Introspection. I like that a lot as a theme for. Yeah, no, I love it, man. All right, sorry, I played Uno reverse on you there. Back to the question of like, why did we raise? What was my thinking through that process? All that stuff.
Mhm.
When we started, we again, so I'm very conservative when it comes to, as Ashley will tell you, I'm very conservative when it comes to planning and strategy, and so the thought was we need to have at least 16 months of runway no matter what. So just me and 2-3 other employees must have that runway. I built that up through savings, so that was step one. And so step two is, okay, let's see who's willing to chip in. Chris Nguyen, my CEO mentor, like one of the first checks in to invest, and then my former bosses, and then people started to try to throw in some cash. So we started with at least a little bit of a pot to kind of work with. That gave me a lot of confidence. And then around the time we started raising, like, valuations were getting crazy. People were raising money left and right. I was a venture capital attorney, and so like to see the term sheets come in, you're just like, wow, this could be me. I could be raising $3 million on a $15 million valuation with no product, right? Like at least we had a product, but there are people who were raising with a dream, right? Like just a pure dream. And somehow they were able to sell that to the venture capitalists. I had a really tough time selling to venture capitalists, which is fascinating to me because I'm sitting here thinking like, wait, hold up. I'm your lawyer. I'm telling you this is a problem. And you're like, nah. So, there are two risks when a investor evaluates your business, right? Product market fit is what you were talking about. And then there's execution risk, right? So if there's product market fit, that's great. And then the next step is, can this team actually execute? So in my brain, I jumped the gun and I jumped to the conclusion of like, well, obviously, this is where hubris comes in, right? You think I'm humble, but this is where the hubris came in. I was like, obviously, product market fit, it stands. I've proven it. I am the target market, duh. So I just have execution risk to prove up. And so when I started pitching, I did a terrible job. I didn't even explain the problem to investors. I'd just be like, well, clearly there's a problem. Here's my solution. And this is why, you need to accept it. And I just learned over time, like investors like, hold up, like you need to show me that this is a problem first, and then we'll get to the execution, like whether or not I could believe that you do it. And so, I had to retool a little bit, prove that there was a problem. And now, like, it's very obvious that legal tooling is lacking. And so, a little bit of industry education helped. And then I got to the execution risk, kind of support argument part of the pitch. And I remember I distinctly remember this one investor who used to be a software engineer. He grilled me on engineering and computer science concepts. And at the end, he apologized. He said, I simply did not believe that someone who had a decent engineering background could go to law school. Like, it made zero sense to me. And so I'm sorry for that, but like, I had to grill you on it. I'm like, okay, great. He's like, but I'm still not going to invest because like legal tech isn't big enough for me. I'm like, well, then why waste my time? So I was pretty knocked down and depressed the first go round when we tried to raise money. And then we realized, who gives us money? Customers. So like, then I was like, oh, we'll just get customers. And so, yeah, we started getting more customers. That was great. That was starting to pay the bills. And then the second wave of investors, now this time, not me going out, but them coming to us because they're like, hey, heard about you guys. Would you like to pitch to us? And then I got sucked in by the siren song yet again, wasted some time doing that. And then I realized, you know what? I don't even want to do it this way. The way that I want to solve the problem is the way that our team wants to solve the problem, which is value proposition first, and then we'll worry about the selling later. Like, the difference between us and our competitors is pretty much the team that builds the product, right? Is the same team that had the problem in the first place. And that's a unique situation to be in. And so you cut out a lot of the, what I call like internal thrashing that happens. Because normally you'd have to have, your end user talk to a product owner, product designer, product manager, whatever you want to call it. That person would talk to a PM and a UI, UX designer, and an engineering person. So that's like 5-6 layers of discussion that need to happen. For us, we get an email from a client that says, hey man, it would be great if I didn't have to send signatures out by myself and you guys just automate all that for me. I'm like, all right, cool. Give me 2 weeks. And then we get it done, and then they're done and they're happy, right? Like, that's what it takes. So for us, it turned out that not getting funding was a competitive advantage, because what it helped us do is it helped us really focus on what mattered, which is making money, getting clients, and listening to the clients. That's how you get the clients, and that's how you make the money. And so it was very logical for us. But if we had gotten the cash, I'll be honest with you, I don't think we would be where we are today. I think we'd be a little bit further behind, because cash gives you too much flexibility. And it gives you if you have too much flexibility, then you're not as focused. You're kind of just chasing multiple shiny objects as opposed to one concrete target.
I like the fact that you put life in the hard mode. Some people like the cushion. Some people like 16 months of runway or more. I'm just kidding. I mean, I love it.
I like it too. But what's even better is like being in a cash flow positive mode where what is some of the people call it? Default alive or something like that. Default mode alive. I forgot what the phrase is, but like basically, unless we screw something up, we're perfectly fine. That's a really exciting position to be in, because we don't have to say yes to everything. We can say no to stuff, and that's really empowering.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. Right. I think most businesses should be built that way. Right. We're seeing, I don't know, during the crypto craze of like people raising $25 million seed round or A round or something like that. You're like, wow, these evaluations are through the roof, But guess what's happening right now? We're seeing a crypto winter. We're seeing a lot of startups lowering their evaluation, actually. Why? Because they're not getting enough customers. They're not making enough revenue. And I feel like the model that you built, although it does take longer to scale up and grow, is highly more sustainable. You keep a lot more equity to the company. Eventually, when you get acquired or go IPO or public, whatever it is, like, you own a lot more of the company, right? And you're a lot more resistant to like the bull market and the bear market and all these things, because at the end of the day, your product is very focused on your customer, and you do a darn good job. Like, we're going to keep coming back to you. So hats off to you, man. That's an amazing story to hear.
No, man, I appreciate it. And I wish, that's one of the reasons why we're doing it the way that we're doing it is like we hope that it's a good signal to other people that you can do this. Like, don't listen to the hype all the time. It's always good to take. I asked, so there are rules, right? And I've said this before, like you shouldn't ask a person. Was it the phrase? Don't ask gift horse in the mouth, right? Like when I ask women, like, why do you date me? This seems like a bad idea for you. Like, don't do that. And then I would ask investors, like, why'd you put in money? I'm just curious, right? Like, what about me? And they're just like, one investor said something that kind of hit hard. He's like, you're really good at listening to advice and then knowing when not to take it. And I was like, oh, interesting. Right. And that's the thing, is like, you should have your ears open. You should listen. You should listen critically, listen to the perspective. I hate listening to critique. It hurts. I'm human. I'm not weird. Like I'm human too, but like there's always a grain of truth in it. And if you can do that, now you're cooking with fire, right? Because then you see the world as it is and not as it should be. And that's that's a powerful position to be in.
Yeah, definitely, man. Being able to incorporate different ideas into the vision without changing the vision is a really important skill as a founder, right? Especially a first time founder, where a lot of times you wake up and you're doing things that isn't done before. There's no blueprint for it. You can't Google for it. You can't look on Wikipedia for it. A lot of it is trusting your gut instinct, right? And sometimes you know what you need to do, but you're scared of it, so you ask for advice. And I think the most detrimental part is taking advice that skews you away from what your original intention is. I think it's a really good skill to have. So great job, Tony.
Appreciate it, man. I mean, hats off to you, man. Like you're doing the same thing on the Asian Hustle Network, and it is. I was talking to Maggie before. Like it's impressive what you guys have been able to build out from scratch. That's
really,
not easy.
really appreciate that. It hasn't been easy, but I think every single founder goes through a similar experience. Whatever we're doing is never easy, right? But we have a lot of conviction and purpose of what we're working on will change the world. And I guess the next part of the podcast is I want to focus on Tony himself. Tony away from the business. Tony, how do you take care of yourself? How do you take care of your mental health? How do you, whenever you have a bad day as a founder, what do you do to like overcome those bad days? Do you take a walk? Do you go out with friends? Do you talk to someone? Do you have a therapist? I want to hear about like, how you overcome your struggles.
Yeah, I think for me, for a lot of people, like exercise is like one way they use to cope. For me at this point, like I'm trying to treat it more like brushing my teeth. So it doesn't have the same therapeutic effect because like I'm already brushing my teeth. Like brushing my teeth anymore is not going to help. So there are two things that I do. Maybe it's a little bit childish, but I play video games. I play a lot of video games. Not a lot. I play video games when I'm super stressed out, and people ask me like, why am I into it? The nice thing about video games is like I'm so immersed and I'm such an intense person that like I always put 100% into whatever it is I'm doing. So for me, playing video games, like I'm in it, I'm yelling, it's like I'm in it, but it's just a complete distraction, lets me kind of breathe. And so, it seems a little bit counterintuitive. Like I'll do that and then I'll meditate. And then the other thing I've been doing a lot more of is I've been coaching my little brother to play golf. And that's been really fun for me. Like I like teaching and I like coaching, and seeing him kind of pick it up because I was such a fanatic around golf is really rewarding. So that's been really nice, is to be able to spend some time with family and just hang out.
Yeah, I like that. I like that way of dealing with stress, right? I think that especially as Asian Americans or Asian entrepreneurs, there's always that thrill to be a part of the hustle culture. I don't get stressed. I work 100 hours a week. I don't get stressed. I just stay in the office all day. I hate that. I think that with your mentality and your answer, it's like it's more well balanced, right? That's what I like to hear. Right? Go out there, go work out, go play golf, go teach, go spend time, go do things you like to do. Entrepreneurship is all about sitting in your office, stressing about all day, looking at business plans and thinking about how to grow the business. That doesn't help, right? I think rest is equally as important to running a business than to actually run the business, right? You need a balance.
I would say this all the time. This sounds extreme, but I would say this all the time, right? I would have associates come to me and they'd be like, "Hey man, I got to pull an all-nighter. Like, what's your advice?" I'm like, "My advice is don't pull the all-nighter." um, right? Like, there's nothing in this world in legal that you need to kill yourself, literally kill yourself for, right? Like, you don't need to do that. Second, if you're adamant and you're going to do it anyways, right? I'll give you option B, which is take a 4-hour or 3-hour nap or 2-hour nap. And they're like, "Well, why would I do that?" Like, I'm like, because you hit a point of diminishing returns at 1 or 2 a.m. and everything that should take 15 minutes now takes an hour. So if you invest the time to take a nap, you will get it out faster. When you get up, pour a cup of coffee, it's just pure numbers, right? You'll get it back out in 15 minutes and you'll have gotten 2 to 3 hours of sleep. I know this sounds, Brian, aren't you glad that, you don't have to do that? Because like, Jesus, that was being a corporate lawyer, man, that it's that level of intensity. But yeah, no, I agree. I think the balance, and by the way, it took me almost 10 years to figure it out. So, it takes time to figure out the balance. I wasn't good at it to start.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, right? And it's funny too, because you're like the fourth founder of this podcast to talk about taking naps and then being more productive afterwards. So it's a proven strategy, right? To reduce stress and get the rest that you need, but just don't let us screw up your sleeping schedule.
Productivity is not effort. That's the decoupling that people have to understand, right? Like if you spent 5 hours doing it the wrong way, right? I got this question today. They're like, "What is HyperDraft?" I'm like, if I was going to sum up HyperDraft, it's me coming by, seeing a bunch of lawyers who are gardening, right? They're just using those little trowels with like the 3, and they're just like trying to, and then I'm just like, use a shovel, right? And then seeing the way that they change their perspective of like, oh, now I can do this other stuff. I'm like, they'll find other things to waste their time on. But spending all that effort, with a trowel is not like there's no glory in it. And that's that hustle thing that I like that you just hit on, which is like, dude, I'm not impressed that you killed yourself. I feel a little bit sad for you, right? Like, I'm not impressed. Is it a good mode to have just in case? Always. It's survival instinct. Great. You don't need to press on that all the time, because by the time you turn 45 and like everything hurts and everything aches and you're having all these health conditions, you're going to regret it.
Yeah, everything already hurts now, so let's not push
No,
any further. So Tony, the last part of the podcast, I wanna ask you a final question. And that question is, what advice would you give to a struggling high school student right now academically about his future in the real world? He or she, her future in the world.
I heard some great advice recently, which is just perspective, which is that there's no dumb people in this world, right? It's all about finding your genius, right? And it takes time, and it takes everybody a little bit different, right? Like the fact that we try to scale it out and you're going to figure it out in 12 years, or going K through 12, everybody grows and evolves differently. That's around the same time, but you don't need to feel rushed because you have your whole life to work. You have your whole life to work. And, my point of encouragement by saying that would be, there is a benefit though to playing the game, and you have to choose. You make that decision. Like, does it make sense for me to play that part of the game to make my life a little bit easier so I have more options? Or do I feel so passionate about what I'm doing that I want to pursue it? If you feel passionate, I'm encouraging people to do it, but don't be like me and be lost, right? Like I was lost, and that was my problem, is like I was lost and also felt like a failure, and it just compounded because I didn't find where where I belonged, where I felt like I belonged. And so just, if I was a little bit more patient and willing to play that game, to get the points, and just give myself time, buy myself time to grow and figure that out, that would have been, my life would have been a little bit easier. But it all works out. I'm on a podcast with Brian from Asian Hustle Network. Like, it don't get better than that.
Nah, thank you, man. Appreciate that. I'm in a podcast with Tony Tai, dude. Successful CEO, power entrepreneur.
We'll go out, and I was talking to Maggie about this. You guys are out in Nevada now, Vegas?
Yeah, we're out in Vegas now.
Something cattle, chubby cattle.
Yeah, we'll go to Chubby Cattle for sure. One of the best shabu places in Las
Shabu shabu.
Vegas.
Love that spot. That'll mean I've won. I've made it.
It'll be our treat anyways.
It'll be awesome, man.
So Tony, how can our listeners find out more about you and reach out to you online?
Yeah, you can check us out as on all the social networks, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, hyperdraft.ai, or check us out on our website, hyperdraft.ai.
Awesome. We'll include all that in the show notes. But Tony, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Brian. It was a pleasure.